The room was quiet, almost too quiet for someone who had once lived her life in blinding bursts of spotlight and applause. Weeks before her death, Carrie Fisher sat by the window of her Los Angeles home, her breathing slow, her gaze fixed on a strip of afternoon light cutting across the floor. Scattered around her were old journals, faded scripts, and a single photograph she never let go of. In that stillness, far from red carpets, far from interviews, she finally whispered the one truth she had spent her whole life avoiding, a truth she said she could never forgive herself for. Those close to her said something shifted in those final weeks. Carrie became softer, quieter, as if replaying a lifetime of triumphs and wounds in her mind. And one night, with her voice barely more than a sigh, she confessed a secret she had protected for decades, one that made her eyes fill, not with regret alone, but with a strange kind of peace. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to join us on this journey, where we revisit the final chapters of the icons who shaped generations and uncover the fragile humanity behind the legends. Carrie Fisher was born in 1956 in Burbank, California, into a world of fame, pressure, and expectation. But to understand what shaped her greatest burden, we must go back, long before Princess Leia, long before the lightsabers and the fame, to the very beginning. To understand the weight Carrie Fisher carried into her final weeks, we must return to the place where every fracture first formed. Carrie Frances Fisher was born into glamour, but not into peace. As the daughter of Hollywood royalty, singer Eddie Fisher, and America's beloved sweetheart Debbie Reynolds, she entered the world already wrapped in bright lights and heavy expectations. But beneath the glitter of fame lay a home shaken by instability, silence, and wounds that would follow her for the rest of her life. Carrie often described her childhood as beautifully broken. She grew up watching her mother perform under the unforgiving glow of stage lights, while her father drifted farther away with every new scandal. When she was just 2, Eddie Fisher left the family in a very public betrayal. An event splashed across every newspaper in America. Those headlines were the first shadows to settle over her young heart. She remembered the sound of her mother's heels on the cold floor late at night, pacing, thinking, trying to hold herself and the family together. She remembered the silence in the house after her father was gone. She remembered feeling responsible for a sadness she never caused. These were the seeds of guilt she would later confess she never truly outgrew. Books became her refuge. Scripts became her shield. She hid behind characters before she ever understood who she was. And even as a child, Carrie sensed that the world expected her to shine as brightly as her mother once did, even if she didn't yet know how to hold that light. Her childhood was a tapestry of love tangled with abandonment, of brilliance shadowed by heartbreak. And in those early years, a truth settled quietly into her bones, that the people she loved most could disappear without warning. But Carrie had no idea that the dreams she ran toward, the fame, the stage, the applause, would one day become the very thing that magnified her deepest wounds. When Carrie Fisher stepped into the world of acting, it wasn't with the innocence of a newcomer. It was with the determination of someone who had already lived a lifetime of emotional storms. She was only 19 when her life changed forever, cast in a film that no one expected would redefine Hollywood. Star Wars didn't just launch her career, it swallowed it whole. And almost overnight, the girl who once hid behind scripts became the face of a global phenomenon. Princess Leia, iconic, fierce, unforgettable. To the world, she was the embodiment of strength, but for Carrie, the role became both a blessing and a burden. Fame didn't arrive gently. It crashed into her life with the force of a tidal wave. Every interview, every magazine cover, every fan encounter reminded her that she was now a symbol, something larger than herself, something she had to live up to even on the days she barely felt alive. Underneath the sharp humor and quick wit she was known for, Carrie struggled. The long filming days, the sudden pressure, the scrutiny over her appearance. Each chipped away at her. She once joked that they didn't want her to be human, just to be Leia. Behind closed doors, that pressure ate at her slowly, quietly. The world saw the smile, the confidence, the charisma. They didn't see the exhaustion behind her eyes. They didn't see the long nights where she tried to silence the noise in her mind. They didn't hear the tremble in her voice when she said she felt both seen everywhere and understood nowhere. Yet the applause kept growing, the fame kept rising, and Carrie, caught between the girl she was and the icon she was expected to be, learned to survive in the only way she could, by laughing at the pain she didn't know how to escape. But when the lights dimmed and the crowds faded, there remained a stillness she could never quite outrun, a stillness that would someday lead her toward the darkest chapters of her life. As the years passed, fame did not loosen its grip on Carrie Fisher. It tightened. The pressure that had once thrilled her began to erode her from the inside. And behind the sharp humor she wielded like armor, a storm was growing. Carrie had inherited more than talent from her parents. She had inherited their fragility too. The world would later learn that she suffered from bipolar disorder, an illness she fought quietly for years before she ever spoke its name aloud. At first, she tried to outrun it. The late nights, the parties, the chemical distractions that Hollywood offered so easily, Carrie embraced them, believing she could drown the voices that kept pulling her between light and darkness. But the highs became too high, the lows unbearably low. Her mind was a battlefield, and her body began to carry the marks of each fight. There were days when she couldn't get out of bed, days when she felt the world closing in, and there were days when she laughed louder than anyone else, trying to hide how close she felt to falling apart. Carrie once said, "If my life weren't funny, it would just be true, and that is unacceptable." Humor became her oxygen, even when breathing hurt. Hospitals, treatments, medications, these chapters were written in shadows. She lost friends. She lost control. Sometimes she lost herself. But one person remained through the chaos: her mother, Debbie Reynolds. Their relationship was complicated, tangled in love, resentment, and unspoken apologies. Yet during Carrie's darkest moments, Debbie held her hand tighter than anyone else. Years later, Carrie would speak openly about her illness, becoming a powerful advocate for mental health. But the battles she shared publicly were only a fraction of the wars she fought in private. And then came the physical toll, the fatigue, the strain on her heart, the exhaustion that settled deep into her bones. The lights of Hollywood no longer dazzled her. The roar of applause no longer filled the empty spaces within her. What she wanted more than anything was peace. And though she didn't know it yet, the quietest, most fragile weeks of her life were already drawing near. Weeks before her death, something in Carrie Fisher grew impossibly still. The whirlwind of interviews, book tours, and fan events began to slow, and she allowed herself, for the first time in years, to sit with the silence she had been running from. In her Los Angeles home, the same one lined with mementos from both her triumphs and her struggles, Carrie spent her afternoons by the window, letting the soft December light paint her face in gold. Those closest to her said she was reflective, almost serene, as though she sensed a curtain drawing slowly closed. She revisited old journals, underlined sentences she once wrote in moments of heartbreak, and held photos of the people she loved deeply, some of whom she had lost, others she feared she had failed. But there was one memory she could never escape, one decision she regretted so profoundly that it haunted her until the final weeks. One evening, as a quiet rain tapped against the windows, Carrie finally spoke it aloud. She was with a close friend, someone who had walked with her through decades of chaos and brilliance. Her voice trembled, softer than a breath. "I never forgave myself," she said, "for the distance I created between me and my mother." Debbie Reynolds had been her anchor and her storm. Their relationship, beautiful, painful, impossibly complex, was a lifetime of misunderstandings and reconciliations. Carrie admitted she wished she had been gentler, more patient, more present. She confessed she feared the years she spent pulling away had left wounds she could never heal. And in that dimly lit room, she wept not for her illness, not for the toll of fame, but for the love she felt she hadn't given enough of. A few days later, she repeated the confession to another friend, almost word for word, as if saying it aloud was the only way to lighten the weight she had carried for decades. She said she wished she could go back, not to change her career, not to avoid the mistakes of youth, but simply to sit beside her mother more often, to tell her she was trying, even when she didn't know how. In those final weeks, Carrie seemed to be stitching together all the broken parts of her life, preparing them gently for rest. And though she did not know how close the ending truly was, she seemed to make peace with a truth she had fought for years. "When this is all over," she whispered once, "I hope she knows I loved her more than anything." And it was in that fragile, trembling honesty that her last secret finally came to light. When Carrie Fisher left this world, she left behind far more than a legacy of cinema. She left a cultural imprint carved into generations, a blend of fierce honesty, flawed humanity, and resilience that continues to echo long after her final breath. Fans gathered across the globe, placing flowers beside Star Wars posters, lighting candles under the night sky, and whispering lines she had once said with that unmistakable blend of wit and vulnerability. Her passing was not merely the loss of an actress. It was the loss of a voice that had dared to speak truth in an industry built on illusion. Her mother, Debbie Reynolds, passed just one day later, an event that many believe proved the depth of their unbreakable bond. In death, as in life, they remained inseparable. Carrie's estate, estimated at several $1 million, was left primarily to her daughter, Billie Lourd, along with her cherished books, scripts, and personal letters. But beyond financial inheritance, Carrie left something rarer, a testament to survival. Through her novels, interviews, and advocacy, she transformed her struggles with mental illness into a torch that continues to guide others out of darkness. Today, her voice still lingers in the halls of comic conventions, in the pages of her books, and in the quiet corners of online communities where people say her honesty saved them. And her most iconic lines, sharp, brave, unforgettable, still echo every time a young fan meets Princess Leia for the first time. In the end, her legacy asks us a simple but powerful question. When the lights fade, what do we leave behind? And who will remember the truths we were brave enough to tell?